Hey everyone, this is Paul C. Tarina, nutritional therapist, Atavist life coach out of Vegas, and today we're going to talk about low carb, how to do low carb safely and effectively, and some tips and hints around going low carb. And just got to start out by saying I feel amazing today. Loving life. People get sick of me saying how great I feel, but I mean, it is the truth. I visit with people all day, every day, wanting to get better and change their life, and usually people just have no clue that the precursor to all great things is feeling amazing. When you feel amazing, everything else is different. And that's what we do with people. You know, we teach people how to eat real food and improve their sleep patterns and all the different things that we work with our foundations. Like, people's lives change on all kinds of different levels. This is, I joke about it all the time. This is like the crying office, because people come in here in tears, you know, just looking for help and answers and solutions, and they just don't realize, but they do, I mean, through experiential knowledge, but initially they don't realize that the reason that they feel off and things aren't going well is because they're nutritionally deficient and they're toxic and they don't think straight, and they have, you know, they don't have the things necessary to make and build their body and create energy the proper way. And once you start to figure all that stuff out, like, everything changes. It's such a beautiful process. I feel amazing every freaking day, and I'm fitter than I've ever been in my entire life. And, you know, I don't know. I just want this for everyone. We want this for everyone. I think that's a good preface to low carb, because, you know, a lot of people are looking for solutions and answers when it comes to real food, and low carb is a popular thing right now. It's kind of a fad thing, and I think a big reason for that is because people are understanding that carbohydrates are a problem. Like, we're sugar addicts, we're a nation of carbivores, you know, so we've kind of addicted ourselves to carbohydrates to a large degree, especially the refined carbohydrates and high amounts of sugar. And so people see results when they go low carb temporarily. Now, we would say in our realm that it's, you know, it's beneficial to use low carb as a tool, but it's not something that you'd want to do long term, because carbohydrates actually have some supportive roles inside the body. You know, we think about carbohydrates as only being used as energy and stored as energy, but they have supportive adjunct roles inside the body. And for sanity purposes, you want to make sure that you have this stuff in the diet, because if you don't, you're going to go crazy. Like, you really are. I don't know many people that can sustain a low carb approach over the long term. And you also have to understand that anything and everything that's healthy and beneficial for you is healthy and beneficial in spurts. Okay, so this is what we call hormesis, or something being hormetic. You know, when I exercise is not necessarily beneficial for me, but it's the adaptation response to my exercise that's good for me. If I exercise all day every day, I'd kill myself. If I fasted all day every day, I would die of starvation. You know, and so carbohydrates, I think you can use low carb as a tool in the context of doing all these other right things, but it's not something that you need to do long term, and I actually don't believe this is beneficial for most people long term. You know, we would recommend doing something that looks more like a cyclic low carb, meaning that you cycle yourself in and out of carbohydrates just to experiment with things a little bit. And for all practical purposes, our definition of carbohydrates are going to be things that contain predominant amounts of glucose and starch and sugar, right? Even though all foods contain a little bit of glucose and a little bit of mix of just about everything, we're talking about things like safe starches, like sweet potatoes, yams, white rice, white potatoes, potatoes in general, taro root, yucca, plantains, anything that's fruit or sweet based, you know, something along those lines. So let's talk about why we want to do low carb. The reason that we would want to do low carb is, number one, we will shock the body into self-sufficiency. And in our realm, self-sufficiency means making the body self-reliant, making the body able to understand how to create its own energy whenever it needs to. Sometimes that could be equated to fat burning, but sometimes we don't know if that's fat burning, because the body could be creating energy and glucose from gluconeogenesis and proteins and sometimes fats. But the bottom line is, we want the body to not be dependent upon carbohydrates, and we want the body to be okay in space. So the first reason that we would want to do a low carb approach is for the self-sufficiency concept. The second reason is to prove to yourself, to prove to ourselves that we can do this. All right, so we have a motto in our world, and that is, if you feel like you can't go without something, you have to go without it. Like, you have to prove to yourself. The goal of doing things our way is to have freedom for life. And freedom includes being able to cycle yourself in and out of things and be without things that you normally feel like you wouldn't be able to be without. So most people, you know, have this perception that low carb is going to be extremely difficult. They're not going to be able to, you know, accomplish it or whatever. And they get through it and they realize, wow, that's not that big a deal. I actually feel amazing, and things weren't as bad as I thought they were. And so we want to be free from that. You know, we want to be able to know that we can go into any situation And we'd be okay without that stuff. You know, if I go visit some family members and for whatever reason I don't have my safe starches and my sugars and fruits and things, I'd be okay. Or if I went into a travel situation and I went to another country or was in some situation I just didn't have access to the things I want to have access to, I want to know that I can be okay and I can survive in that scenario. And then the third reason is that we want to experiment to see what works for us, because not everyone's going to respond the same to this kind of stuff. You know, like, you know, low carb may work for a lot of people, but it's not going to work for everybody. You know, some people, depending on your genetic predispositions and maybe your ethnicity, are going to do better on fruits and starches and things, or a relatively higher carbohydrate diet. But as long as you're doing that stuff in the context of a real food way of eating, then, you know, there's just a ton of room for experimentation. You have to see what works for you. Then you also have to have this wisdom and understand that over the long term, like, nothing is set in stone. So what works for me today may not work for me in 5 years or next year or next month or whatever. So you have to do some constant experimentation. So, so for our low carb approach, what we would recommend is the following. Number one, you have to fully immerse yourself in real food. And in our world, real food means the 5 food groups. And if you're not privy to that information, you need to reach out to us and work with us on that. So within the context of eating real food, we recommend abiding by our ideal day's meals. And for us, that means the first step in going low carb is you want to go through an extended period of time of not having carbohydrates in the morning, first thing in the morning, because we want to start slowly by training the body how to not use carbs for a specific time period of the day. So pulling out carbohydrates in the morning and not having them for that first part of the day is getting a low carb training effect without actually going low carb. Next, you'd want to start to pull back on your sources of safe starches and fruits and sugars and things like that. So whatever level or amount that you're having on a regular basis within the context of eating real food, within the context of pulling that back in the morning, then you'd want to start to pull back on the amounts, and I'd say maybe by half or something like that, to kind of prep yourself for something that looks kind of low carb. And therefore, by the time you get to the low carb piece, it's really not that big a deal. And then you definitely want to go through 2 weeks of being strict low carb. And for us, strict low carb means pulling out all safe starches, we mentioned before, fruits, sugar, and alcohol. All right, we're not measuring carbohydrates. We're not doing the whole under 100 grams or 50 grams of net carbs and doing all that, because our goal with our way of doing things is to be free and to let things be intuitive. And so we're not going to be measuring. But if you pull back on safe starches and your fruits and sugars and alcohol, then what you're left with is meat, fat, and vegetables for the most part, you know. And for most people, that's going to be relatively low carb, you know. So just by doing this, for most people, they're going to see tremendous amounts of body composition shifts and energy level changes. And yes, we're all going to go through a few days of, you know, maybe some headaches and nausea and what feels very uncomfortable because you're going through this adaptation process. But when most people get through that, they feel lean and tight and clean and clarity and just all the things that we're looking for something like this. And so then what people will start to use low carb for is a way to reset the body. You know, so if you go through a weekend of just being off and just kind of falling off the wagon, or a time period of just being off, then you can actually use low carb to kind of reset yourself. Or if you got pictures coming up or, you know, something like that, it's a useful tool. But then in general, we'd recommend people going through what we call a cyclic low carb. Now, just to answer a few questions that usually come up around this. So if you're doing low carb, that does not mean you have to pull out dairy and nuts and seeds and things like that. So, you know, cheese is going to be a useful tool. Heavy cream is going to be a useful tool. You know, full fat yogurt, even though it has some lactose in it, and you look at the ingredients and it shows a little bit of sugar, like that's perfectly fine because it's not included in our safe starches and fruits. And so other things, you know, people ask about are things like squashes and zucchini and beets and carrots. And yes, we can look at nutrition data and see that they have a relatively high amount of sugar and glucose and stuff like that. Again, if it doesn't fit into our definition of safe starches, fruits, and alcohol, we'd say it's perfectly fine and on the table. Now, intuitively, you have to understand that the more starchier something is, the more we're kind of moving it away from this direction of what we're trying to, or a goal we're trying to accomplish, which is the low carb approach. So I probably would not be doing a lot of acorn squash and spaghetti squash and squashes in general, just because they have a relatively higher amount of starch. But, you know, they are in the deal, and you can use them in moderation as a tool to kind of help you get through that transitional period. Properly prepared legumes are fine. So if you want to do your own beans, even though they have a relatively high starch content, we would consider them kind of slow carbs because they're digested slow and they don't have a huge impact on blood sugar levels. I'll probably try to minimize, you know, the beans and lentils signal, just because they do have some starch in it, but they're perfectly fine. And then also stevia is going to be appropriate, but you have to be careful about stevia because sometimes when you have that sweet taste, even though it doesn't have sugar with it, the body is expecting sugar, and so it gives you some blood sugar handling issue type things, you know. So, and sometimes it will increase cravings for some people. Things like cocoa powder, you know, are fine as long as you're not doing the sweetened cocoa powder. And then, you know, we recommend always being prepared, you know, so especially during the transitional period, your body is going to be fighting tooth and nail to revert back to being a sugar burner or to revert back to using those carbohydrates as a fuel source. And that manifests itself as things like cravings and hunger and being tired and having headaches and things like that. And so what we'd recommend is always having something available to snack on, because even if you snack on something that doesn't have any carbohydrates, it's still going to increase your blood sugar levels just a little bit because your body is getting some energy from the food, even if it's just meat and protein and fat. So have some protein and fats available to snack on, and just understand that, you know, if you need to reach for those things in a low energy, low blood sugar handling situation where you have like some headaches and some nausea and you're just feeling really irritable, reach for something, but don't reach for the thing that you really want, which is the carbohydrates. Reach for something protein or fat based. And then if you do have low energy, headaches, nausea, and those types of symptoms, part of this is just pushing through and understanding that there's going to be about 3 to 5 days of being uncomfortable. You can also, we love using essential oils, so doTERRA's Soothing Blend, the Deep Blue, the Past Tense, the Tension Blend, using things like peppermint. Cardamom's a great one. You can experiment with a lot of different essential oils for symptomatic relief, temporary symptomatic relief. And then just understanding, you know, like this is just part of the process and I got to fight through this. And again, most people, once they get through that adaptation period, are going to feel absolutely amazing. Now, some other tips and hints we have in a downloadable PDF, and then also if you're in our progression, like you actually get this as a handout and it's in our resources, you can ask us for it if you're not in our progression. And so the first thing that we would recommend is, actually if you subscribe to our blog, we should have a sign up, subscribe in this blog post that you can ask for this PDF, download PDF. So the first thing we'd recommend to help you transition is make sure that you're eating fatty fish on a regular basis to get EPA and DHA, which will help give your body what it needs to anti-inflame and help with headaches and things. We're huge fans of fermented cod liver oil, and we sell some in our office, and that has high levels of vitamin A, vitamin D, EPA, and DHA, and people see tremendous benefits from that, just in general for health, but especially going through a low-carb phase where you're dealing with headaches and maybe some detoxification type symptoms. We also recommend consuming salt. You know, all of us should be consuming salt anyway, unrefined, unprocessed salt like Himalayan salt, real salt, Celtic salt, because it's intact with nutrients and things, but especially when you're going through a low carb phase, your body's going to be dumping muscle glycogen, muscle sugar, and it's going to be, when it does that, it's going to also be getting rid of a lot of water, and then with that water comes a lot of sodium, and so you need to make sure that you're replacing that. And then also we'd recommend having natural real food sources of potassium and magnesium. So sources of potassium, great ones would be spinach, and then also avocados and full fat dairy products, especially yogurt. And then for magnesium, we'd recommend real food sources of that as well. So spinach is another great one. And then maybe some mixed nuts. And we're big fans of taking a magnesium supplement. I think most people are going to benefit from taking magnesium, no matter how real food you are, because most people are going to be deficient in magnesium. And we sell a great product in our office that we've had a lot of great results with. And we've tested a lot of different things from Amazon and stuff. It's through Biotics Research, and it's a product that we call MGzyme, and it's relatively inexpensive. And it's something that we think would benefit most people, especially going through a low-carb approach, but also just in general. Make sure that you stay hydrated, because remember, you know, as we go through this low-carb phase, the body is dumping muscle glycogen, so it's also getting rid of a lot of water, a lot of sodium, a lot of minerals, so make sure that you're hydrating properly. We would recommend maybe increasing your fat intake just a little bit to reinforce that signal of fat for fuel and to help compensate for eliminating the carbs and the sugars and starches. And then we'd also recommend getting either natural sources of medium chain triglycerides, MCTs, which would include full fat dairy products and then also coconut products, or you can also take a high quality MCT oil, and we're huge fans of this one that we sell in our office by Pereira Performance called Captree, and it is just amazing stuff. So MCTs are really easy for the body to use for energy. It does not require much digestive effort. Those MCTs, if they're made from the right sources and have the right chains, will not, it's physiologically impossible for it to go to fat storage. So I can take some MCT oil, I take it every day anyway, but I could take it, you know, during a low carb phase and give my body some energy and some brain energy that is not sugar based, and it will not go to fat storage. So MCT oil would be something extremely beneficial, and again, we sell that in our office. But then also, you can get real food sources like full fat dairy products and coconut products. We recommend when it comes to exercise, if you're used to doing CrossFit type stuff, really intense glycolytic demanding stuff, you're going to notice a drop in performance. So maybe during that transitional phase where you're trying to adapt to things, pull back on your exercise and maybe opt for constant low level activity or something like that. So hope that's useful. I know it's from the heart, and if you have any questions about anything, just make sure that you reach out to us and send us a message, and we're here to support you in any way that we can. Okay? Thank you guys all so much for tuning in.
I'm not photogenic.
Yes, you are photogenic.
I'm not.
Yes, you are. Hey, Rich, this
Hey.
is Rich. We're about to do the low carb video. So,
Oh, okay.
you got any tips or hints for low carb that you remember?
For me, for low carb, when I would, let me rethink that. See?
What? The first thing that comes up? It's not even recording. Those are practice.
You're lying. Just talking to.
Yeah.
Just at the,
Oh yeah.
So for low carb, I think the most important thing is remember increase your vegetable intake. That'll help curb any of the appetite, because I noticed that I was more hungry, started doing the low carb. And then also increasing your fat intake. So always adding an extra, maybe a half an avocado, or even if I was really hungry, a whole avocado with some olive oil with dinner. That helped really good and made everything a lot easier.
Perfect, because that's a couple of the points I'm covering. Dude, you're looking good, man.
You feel good.
Let me see you walk out of here.